PR Connections Radio presents.
Welcome to Vegas Hockey Hub here on PRConnectionsRadio.com, the voice of new media. I'm your host, Ian Rachiele, and on this edition of Vegas Hockey Hub, we are going to be talking about and actually making the connection between a junior hockey league known as the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League and your Vegas Golden Knights. And this is going to be kind of a fun episode, as I'm going to kind of be linking and using some connections to really explain how when it comes to junior hockey, and more importantly, when it comes to a region of junior hockey, how there has been some players, some really successful players who came from Quebec and ended up being a very valuable and key member of your Vegas Golden Knights. And we're going to do all of that here on Vegas Hockey Hub. And before we do that, go to PRConnectionsRadio.com, voice of new media. Check out all the amazing content we have on the network. We have, for example, Vegas Hockey Hub. We have a dozen shows on there. And there is so much content that's going to be on this network. So go to PRConnectionsRadio.com, voice of new media, and check out all of the stuff we have on there. If you also want to go on to the social media pages, we are everywhere at YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. And this is going to be a really fun episode. I am really excited to be talking about this and really seeing what they have gotten. So yeah, go to our social media pages, subscribe, like. That would definitely be much appreciated. It helps us out a lot. Now, you guys also want to follow your host. I'm also right down there at Ian J. Rachiele. So, to kind of give you some context and to kind of give you a little bit of a background on what this is. Now, the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, this is part of the Canadian Hockey League. This is one of the top tier of Canada's hockey league. So when it comes to junior hockey and when it comes to all of that, it is going to be a really good thing to talk about because there's so much talent that come from the Canadian Hockey League. You have the WHL, which is the Western Hockey League. You have the BCHL, which is the British Columbia Hockey League. You have the OHL, which is the Ontario Hockey League. But something that I don't think gets stressed enough or even talked about enough is the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League. Now, there are some teams that are in this league that actually have done some really good. In fact, a few teams that I would say when it comes to the Quebec Junior Hockey League, this is going to be a few teams that I'm going to be talking about. There's about 18 teams that are in this league. But some of the teams that are very noticeable are, for example, the Quebec Ramparts. You have some teams, for example, like the Cape Breton Eagles. You have the Charlottetown Islanders, the Halifax Mooseheads. There are some really good teams that have come from Quebec. And more importantly, this is something that we actually need to talk about with your Vegas Golden Knights. There are a handful of players who are on the roster right here, right now, that came from Quebec and are on the Golden Knights roster. And the first player, the marquee, if you will, the main player who have actually came from the Quebec, from the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, this is Jonathan Marchessault. And with Jonathan Marchessault, this is going to be a player who we definitely are going to be spending a lot of time on. But more importantly, when it comes to the QMJHL, this is a guy in Jonathan Marchessault who actually came from Quebec. He played out there in Quebec City. And when you actually talk about NHL alumni and players who have been part of this organization, him coming from the Quebec City and then him playing for the Quebec Ramparts. And this is a guy who in 4 seasons playing for Quebec, he actually ended up having a very stellar career for himself. This is somebody who in the last year of him playing in Quebec had 40 goals and 95 points in his final season playing junior hockey. There's also the same guy in Jonathan Marchessault who had to grind after being undrafted free agent. He had to work hard, and then he had to end up becoming a undrafted free agent. He spends time in the AHL. He kind of bounces back and forth from team to team, professional tryout agreement, contract here, entry level here. Jonathan Marchessault went from being an undrafted free agent to being a solid player who was an all-star in the AHL, to then earning his way in the middle six in the NHL, and then becoming a Vegas Golden Knight, and has been, as of this point in time, and as of this recording, Jonathan Marchessault has been the most impactful and the most influential player in Vegas Golden Knights history. When it comes to the stat sheet, Jonathan Marchessault is number 1 or number 2 in almost every single category you can come up with in Vegas Golden Knights history. This is a guy in Jonathan Marchessault that games played, goals, assists, points, plus minus, wins above replacement, win shares, you name it. Jonathan Marchessault is at the top of every single list in Vegas Golden Knights history. And throughout the 7 seasons that Jonathan Marchessault has been a Vegas Golden Knight, he has been a cornerstone. He has been someone who has been an everyday player in Vegas. And he went from a guy who in year 1 was on the top line with Carlson and Smith, being someone who had about 70 points in year 1, to eventually graduating and really kind of getting his own momentum, building up a very solid career, getting, 30 goals, 35, getting 40 goals like we just saw this past season. Jonathan Marchessault has been a really good player for your Vegas Golden Knights. But overall, what I like about Jonathan Marchessault is how he is a team player. How Jonathan Marchessault is a guy who you can see when he is on the ice, he defends his teammates, he will drop the gloves if he needs to, but you can also tell that he has the respect of everybody in that locker room. You don't hear negative comments about Jonathan Marchessault, and actually you hear a lot of positive. You hear a lot of good feedback from Vegas Golden Knights players when Jonathan Marchessault gets mentioned. And obviously, we are a little bit away from this happening, but you know what? With Jonathan Marchessault, regardless of what happens, okay, a couple of months from now, when the time comes, whatever happens with Jonathan Marchessault, if he stays, if he goes, if he resigns, if he goes somewhere else, regardless of what happens with Jonathan Marchessault, the fact is, in his 7 years being with the Vegas Golden Knights, he is a Conn Smythe Trophy winner. All right, this is a guy in Jonathan Marchessault who will forever be loved here in Vegas because he was the playoff MVP. He has been a team MVP for your Vegas Golden Knights over the past 7 seasons. And the fact that he came from Quebec City, the fact that he played for the Quebec Ramparts of the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, and this is a situation where Jonathan Marchessault has been a very impactful player for your Vegas Golden Knights. And kind of looking at it moving forward, Jonathan Marchessault, regardless of what happens a few months from now, he is going to be a player who will be remembered forever with your Vegas Golden Knights. But as you can see, I have player number 1 as Jonathan Marchessault. That's right. Not only is Jonathan Marchessault the most impactful player to have come from Quebec and from the QMJHL, but there's actually 9 different players who have had a history and have come over from Quebec and are members of your Vegas Golden Knights. Player number 2. Now, this player has been an original misfit, just like Jonathan Marchessault. This is a guy who ended up being a really solid everyday guy for the Vegas Golden Knights when he is healthy. And this is a guy in William Carrier who ended up coming from the Cape Breton Eagles. And for a guy in William Carrier, he spent 4 seasons playing for Cape Breton. And as we did our player profile earlier this year, I will leave a tab up here in post-production. But with William Carrier, when we actually studied him and did a player profile, it is incredible what he did in 2011-2012. His best season playing in the QMJHL. In 66 games, he had 70 points and 65 penalty minutes, averaging over a point per game and just under a penalty minute per game. And with William Carrier, he went from somebody who spent 4 solid seasons playing for Cape Breton and then going to the AHL, being out there at the Buffalo Sabres organization. He gets sent to the Vegas Golden Knights during the 2017 NHL expansion draft, and he has been a core member of the Vegas Golden Knights for the past 7 seasons. And similar to Jonathan Marchessault, William Carrier has kind of built a cult-like following here in Vegas for his physicality, for his kind of stone hands that William Carrier has on the bottom 6. This is a guy who actually his best season of his career happened actually not this year, but last year when he had 16 goals and 25 points in the year the Vegas Golden Knights went all the way and won the Stanley Cup. So for William Carrier, this ended up being a situation where he ended up being a player that your Vegas Golden Knights could see as a everyday guy on the bottom 6. And what he has done the past 7 years, I mean, this is a guy who actually played a full season back in 2019-2020, and as someone who your Vegas Golden Knights have gotten well over 300 NHL games throughout his career with the Vegas Golden Knights. And I've always said this before, and I've said this on the channel time and time again, the amount of games you can get from a player is respectable. And when you can find a player that you have drafted from the expansion draft that plays over 300 career games for your organization, that is insane value to find. So with William Carrier, the fact that he has played as many games as he has is a real kind of a testament to what he has done throughout his career. And I also do want to mention this, by the way, he is actually not the only Golden Knights player who actually came from Cape Breton, as former goaltender Marc-Andre Fleury, or as some people call him Flower, he actually has his jersey retired with Cape Breton, the number 29. He played there for a couple of years, and he ended up being the number 1 overall pick. He wins a bunch of Stanley Cups. You already know the story there. He was taken by the Vegas Golden Knights during the 2017 NHL expansion draft, and he spent a couple of seasons playing for your Vegas Golden Knights. So he came from the same team as William Carrier. And as an honorable mention, Maxime Lagacé. This is a goaltender who did spend a little bit of time with the Vegas Golden Knights. In fact, he spent 2 seasons as a backup goaltender for the Vegas Golden Knights. He came from Cape Breton, just alongside those two. So very interesting to really sit there and see how players have kind of gone down in terms of what they have done with the Vegas Golden Knights. So for William Carrier, he was an additional member, somebody who came from Quebec. But we have a few more players left to go. And this next player, we have also done a player profile on, and this is a guy who has become a everyday kind of staple with your Vegas Golden Knights. And of course, I am talking about Nick Waugh. And when it comes to Nick Waugh, he has a very fascinating story because of what he had to do while playing in Quebec. Now, for the people who do not know about Nick Waugh, let me kind of set the tone here. So for Nick Waugh, he ended up playing in Quebec and ended up being a really solid member in Quebec. As a matter of fact, he played 4 seasons in Quebec, and his best season was in 2015-2016, where he had 48 goals and 90 points in over 60 games that season. So overall, what a fantastic resume that Nick Waugh had. As a matter of fact, something that Nick Waugh did in juniors, which is very impressive, is that he scored no less than 15 goals per season he was in Quebec. And he also had no less than 40 points throughout the 4 years that he was playing in Quebec. He's also the same guy who ended up being all-team all-star first team out there in Quebec, and was also on the top prospects game in the CHL back when he was about to get drafted. So for a guy like Nick Waugh, he did a really solid job playing out there in Quebec and being part of this organization. And something that I do have to mention is that he isn't the only one who came from that team that was part of Nick Waugh. As a matter of fact, there is somebody else who came over and ended up having an immediate impact when it came to the NHL. As a matter of fact, there has been some really good players who have come from Quebec and did a solid job with your Vegas Golden Knights. And of course, I'm talking about the next player on this list, and that is somebody that not many people would have expected to have played for Quebec, considering his name. But this is actually someone who, when he came over, he actually had to join the Canadian Hockey League after moving over from Russia. And I'm talking about Ivan Barbashev. Ivan Barbashev, he was, he started out in Russia. Okay, he started out in Russia, and then in the 2012 CHL import draft, he was selected first overall by the Wildcats, and he would join the CHL. He would join in Quebec, and he would play 3 seasons for the Wildcats. His best season actually was in 2014-2015, where, by Hockey Reference, that's where I'm using all this data, he had 45 goals and 95 points in just 57 games. So overall, Ivan Barbashev did a really solid job playing in Quebec. And this is a situation where when you actually study the team out there and you actually see who came from there in Quebec, it's really quite fascinating how when it comes to the Wildcats, you have Ivan Barbashev, who was a really good member of that organization for sure. But the fact that Ivan Barbashev went on from not just being part of the Wildcats, but he then gets drafted by the St. Louis Blues. He wins a Stanley Cup there. He gets dealt and then traded to the Vegas Golden Knights, and then becomes an everyday member out here in Las Vegas. So for Ivan Barbashev, he has also been an incredible player and someone who your Vegas Golden Knights can count on day in and day out. So as we are talking about how in Quebec, the QMJHL helped build the Vegas Golden Knights, how the junior hockey system, and more importantly, junior hockey in Quebec, brought some amazing players who eventually joined the Vegas Golden Knights. Player number 1 is a franchise favorite and a superstar here in Vegas, and I'm talking about all-star Jonathan Marchessault. Player number 2 was a former misfit and someone who has been an everyday guy here in Vegas in William Carrier. Player number 3 has been a constant on the bottom 6 and a solid center at best in Nick Waugh. And then player number 4 was a guy that they acquired from the St. Louis Blues and helped the Vegas Golden Knights win a Stanley Cup in Ivan Barbashev. So as we're talking about how in Quebec, their junior hockey league helped build the Vegas Golden Knights, those are the 4 prime examples. And yes, I briefly mentioned him, but honorable mention to Marc-Andre Fleury. He came from Cape Breton, the same team as William Carrier did, but he was, like I said, an honorable mention. He's no longer with the Vegas Golden Knights, but since he was an original misfit, I do have to include Marc-Andre Fleury as an honorable mention. Now, some other notable players who came from Quebec and are now on the active 50 contracts the Vegas Golden Knights have at this present moment. You have who they acquired at the trade deadline in Anthony Mantha. Now, Anthony Mantha, he was a trade acquisition. He is someone who is, part of the Golden Knights organization. He is someone who the Vegas Golden Knights have had since acquiring him from the Washington Capitals. But what's interesting about Anthony Mantha is that he played 4 seasons in Quebec And his best season, I really want you to hear this, it's insane to think about. In 2013-2014, Anthony Mantha had 57 goals in 57 games. He registered 120 points in 57 games. It's also the same Anthony Mantha who in the 2014 Canadian Hockey League playoffs, in 24 games that year, he had 24 goals in 24 games. So to say that Anthony Mantha was absolutely exceptional in his final season playing in Quebec would be an understatement. As a matter of fact, when it came to Anthony Mantha, this is a guy who was taken in the first round, and obviously so, considering the stats that I gave you. Now, do I know what the future is going to be for him? Obviously, just like with Carrier, just like with Marchessault, a few months from now, they are going to be going on and they will be in free agency with your Vegas Golden Knights. I don't know what the future holds. But for Anthony Mantha, this is a guy who the Golden Knights acquired at the trade deadline, and this is someone who has played a handful of games since being with the Vegas Golden Knights. Some other players, and these are all, prospect guys. So for anybody who's been watching my prospect watch, you might know who this guy is. For the people who don't know about it, I highly recommend opening a new tab and looking at my prospect watch that I have been having for this entire season. Because Matthew Chatterford is a name you need to know. Matthew Chatterford is going to be a player who everyone should take notice, and more importantly, is a player who everyone who's watching right now needs to be familiar with. As Matthew Chatterford, currently playing for the Halifax Mooseheads, he has had an exceptional season this year. As a matter of fact, when it comes to Matthew Chatterford, I'm just going to show you. I'm not even going to say anything. I'm just going to show you what I mean. When it comes to Matthew Chatterford, really exceptional way that he played this season, as he actually ended up having an incredible 2023-2024 season. As Matthew Chatterford, he ended up having this statistics right here, and I'm going to be listing them out to you once again from hockeyreference.com. I do appreciate what they got. In 65 games this season for Halifax, Matthew Chatterford had 40 goals and 90 points in the 2023-2024 season. So for a player like Matthew Chatterford, who right now is the number 3 prospect heading into the year for your Vegas Golden Knights, I find this really fascinating and really interesting, the situation that you have with Matthew Chatterford, where he is a young, up-and-coming guy, only 19 years old in Matthew Chatterford, and depending on how he develops and depending on how he plays, Matthew Chatterford is going to be a really must-see player for your Vegas Golden Knights moving forward. And the fact that he's playing out there in Halifax, in Nova Scotia, I do have to give him a lot of credit there when it comes to how he has played and, more importantly, what he has done since being drafted by the Vegas Golden Knights and what he did this past season while being in Halifax. And, unfortunately, there are no NHL players who did play for Halifax who has been on the Vegas Golden Knights roster. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to, kind of find that information and really show you some players who came from Halifax, who was part of the Golden Knights organization. So let's move over to Charlottetown, because Charlottetown Islanders, they are from Prince Edward Island, and they actually do have some good alumnus that are now part of the NHL. And the first one that I'm going to be mentioning is the top prospect and the number 1 prospect in the Golden Knights system, and that is defenseman Lucas Cormier. Now, for Lucas Cormier, this is a guy playing out there for Charlottetown. 4 seasons he was playing for the Islanders out there in Quebec, and his best season was in 2021-2022, where in 62 games, he had 81 points for the Islanders. So in his final season playing in Quebec, playing out there in the Junior Hockey League, he actually not only had 81 points in 62 games, but he actually was named to the All-First team in Quebec, both in 2021 and in 2022. And more importantly, for Lucas Cormier, he was named Defenseman of the Year in Quebec, not once, but twice, before being on the Golden Knights organization. Now, Lucas Cormier is in the AHL. He did make his NHL debut against the New York Islanders back in January. I do say congratulations to him. What an accomplishment there. But as a prospect and as a top prospect for the Golden Knights, it'll be interesting to see how Cormier does, just like Matthew Chatterford, who was the number 3 prospect entering the year. He came from the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League. And this is a guy who is definitely going to be an impact player if it's done correctly. Now, the final 2 prospects, you have Patrick Gay. And Patrick Gay, he came from the Charlottetown Islanders, actually came for the same team as Lucas Cormier, but his statistics are absolutely insane to think about. So in his final season playing in Quebec, Patrick Gay, this is a guy who his statistics playing in Quebec in 2021, 2022, he had 55 goals and 104 points in his final season playing in Quebec. And after spending a season in the ECHL back in 2022, 2023, where he averaged over a point per game in the Savannah Ghost Pirates back in 2022, 2023, this past season, he has actually been averaging over a point per game once again in the ECHL. So for a guy like Patrick Gay, this is someone who, like I said, he has been in the ECHL the past 2 seasons, 22 years old at this point, but he has been a really good player and someone who has been a really good skater to have in Savannah in the ECHL. And then the last player that we are going to be talking about that came from Quebec and is a top 10 prospect for the Vegas Golden Knights. This is a defenseman who is kind of really earning his chops right now and being a member of the Vegas Golden Knights, and that is Joe Fleming. So Joe Fleming, who spent 2022, 2023 playing for Sherbrooke in Quebec, he actually had 5 goals and 27 points in his first and only season playing in Quebec. And that Joe Fleming would go be with the Savannah Ghost Pirates this past season. And he has done a really solid job and has gotten around 100 penalty minutes in his first season playing professional hockey for the Vegas Golden Knights organization. So overall, I hope this video was very informational for you. And I kind of hope that this video kind of lets you know about how Quebec, and more importantly, the junior hockey league that's out there in Quebec, where they have teams from not just Quebec, but Nova Scotia, from Prince Edward Island. I mean, there's so many different provinces that are involved with this league. But when it comes to how this connection has become, there's been some really solid players. And like I said, there are currently 9 current players either on the main roster or in their farm system who came from Quebec and are now with the Vegas Golden Knights organization. So until next time, I'm your host, Ian Rachiele. I hope you found this informational. And until next time, continue watching hockey, go support junior hockey, and go Knights, go!